Greetings, Mark Garang here, publisher of The Sun, and Happy New Year, everyone. This is our first Sun video of the year, and George Epstein, our Sun columnist and semi-regular guest, is joining me.
Thanks for having me to start out the year. Appreciate it.
Okay, we're going to break some news right here.
Okay.
So George is saying that there's something afoot in Madison with an SB2 move.
Yeah, just a tiny bit of history, if you don't mind.
Sure.
20 years or so ago, the SAU 13 had a superintendent and a special ed director who misled the town about the special education funding and how it had to be spent. And they basically said that the law says we must spend it on this. Well, they wanted to spend it on that, but the law didn't say they had to spend it on that. The town was very unhappy about that. And while Madison had defeated SB2 for both the town and the school for a number of years soundly, this so angered the townspeople that they went ahead and voted SB2 into law. Not the town meeting, but the school meeting was changed to an SB2 format with a deliberative session and then voting at the polls.
Are you the moderator for the, I know you're the town moderator. Are you the moderator for the school too?
Yeah, both town and school, 38 years with a year or two off.
I don't think most people know, I mean, who follow the wonky stuff of SB2. I didn't know that Madison was an SB2 on the school side.
On the school side alone, and it was a reaction to a very inappropriate behavior on the part of administrators. They're long gone. They're not around anymore. We have a wonderful special ed director and superintendent in SAU 13 now. And so the years have gone by. The population of students has declined for all the schools around here, and certainly Madison, which is down to 111 in our elementary school, which is sort of 2/3 of what it had been not so very long ago. The result has been that the default budget and the school board's proposed budget have been virtually identical almost every year for many years. And it's occurred I think in most of the towns around here as well. And so the claim 20 years ago that SB2 will give the voters more control, they'll be able to defeat the school budget without having to have everybody be there and sit through the school meeting and so on. It's become, well, it was false. It simply empowered the school boards over the years to create budgets and to devise default budgets that were virtually identical and gave school boards a great deal more power than they used to have.
And part of that, and I'm interrupting here, but part of that power, because we face the same thing in Conway, is that it's not just a school board, but when you have the annual school meeting, because you have the ballot later, not very many people show up at the meeting.
Nobody.
And in Conway, it's dominated by people who have an interest in the school. So that's the time where you can cut the budget, and it's not done because those who show up.
Well, that's right, and even in towns where you get a bigger turnout and they start to consider cutting the budget, it raises concerns as to whether this tiny group of people that show up for a school deliberative session should really be taking away some of the authority and the power to, and have the power and claim the power to so disrupt the education. That's what happened in the town of Croydon in New Hampshire. There's a group of free staters who took over their school meeting, cut the budget roughly in half, and then the town had a massive turnout in a special school meeting that completely reversed that. And so you get into, as you say, small groups controlling
so what's
things
the news?
and deliberative sessions. So the news is twofold. There were a group of people, a bunch of people who were saying, well, we're going to petition to put the reversal of SB2 on the ballot in Madison. The school board looked at it and surprisingly a little bit to me, the school board said, you know what, this is something we should be doing and should be changing, and we should have more community involvement in our schools, and we should have less power, is really what it turns out to. And the school board themselves said, don't bother with the petition. We'll put it on ourselves, which the school board has the power to do. And so, excuse me, the warrant in Madison will contain the opportunity to vote to reverse SB 2 in the town.
Okay, so just to follow that through, if this goes through, which is amazing because it's really the SB 2 favors school boards. I mean, in general.
Yep.
So that's kind of an enlightened school board you folks have down there in the good town of Madison. So, but if this goes through, it obviously wouldn't. It's going to be voted on this spring, and it would probably take effect in 2026, which means that there'll be a budget. You have an old-fashioned town meeting, town school meeting, right?
You'll have a deliberative session this year,
right? But I mean,
then a year out, yeah, we'll have a regular old meeting. We'll start to get attendance again, which used to be. And this is pretty typical in most SB2 towns. There were usually 3, 4, 5 times at least as many people attending a traditional school or town meeting as attends the deliberative session for towns and school meetings.
So this idea of the SB2, and I mean, I think, what's obvious is that it gives the townspeople an opportunity to really cut the budget. Nobody's going to show up at an annual school meeting and add a bunch of money.
That's wrong. And so,
that's wrong?
Absolutely. And over the years, it was not at all unusual for people to get up and say, gee, I think we should have one more grade so that we don't have 23 kids in a class, we only want 17. And in fact, it was a school district meeting, a traditional school meeting, 25 years ago, I'm going to guess, maybe even 30 in Madison, where the town voted to instruct the school board never to have more than 15 students in K through 3, and I think it's 18 in 4 through 6, which added teachers and added to the budget. Another example was the town of Madison school district in a traditional meeting deciding they didn't enjoy the service that they were receiving from SAU 9. And the result was the creation of SAU 13, with everyone in the room knowing it was going to be more expensive than simply being a small portion of the SAU 9 budget. Madison, Tamworth, and Freedom got together and formed SAU 13 and cost themselves more money. So it
well, what's the motivation?
Works both ways.
Well, no, for this particular effort, what's the motivation?
Control. It's the opportunity, whether it's to increase or decrease the budget, whether it's to change staffing, whether it's to modify services that are being delivered outside of the regular school day. Should kids be able to stay later? Should there be a program?
I mean, what's your
for them?
sense? Do you think the community is interested? I mean, there's got to be some. I realize the fact is that it could be with a traditional school meeting, you can increase or decrease the budget, but there's got to be some movement on the ground of whether the initiative, like in Conway, I mean, I was instrumental in getting the Charter Commission going. Part of that whole idea, which only got a majority of the vote, but not a supermajority, so it didn't pass, but was to control the school budget and get rid of SB2, which we found out we couldn't. So if there was a movement to get rid of SB2 on the school side here, it was totally to decrease the budget. I mean, I think that's pretty clear.
I am sorry, I am not a Pollyanna normally, but this is about just good democracy. The people in Madison are disgusted by a process that took away the authority of the community, of the voters, of the people, of the taxpayers, of the parents, to be able to have more direct control over their school. And they wanted that control, and they do want that control, a lot of them. And we'll see whether it's 60%, which is the number you got to hit, will turn out to vote and will reverse SB2. The practical effect, though, is to take this kind of silly pro forma process of cooking up a budget and a default budget that are identical and making the vote of the people irrelevant. It just doesn't matter. And so people want more control. They want to have the opportunity to get up and say, I want to add this position, I want to delete this position, we need this funded, we don't want that funded, and to have that discussion and have it matter. Because now it doesn't matter.
Okay. So, and in Conway, just to let review a little bit, in Conway, default budgets are always the same as the proposed budget because it's cooked, and it's like last year's
Same
budget.
in Madison.
Yeah, and it's everywhere. So it's last year's budget plus this, this, and this, which is equal to
It's
next year's
very
budget.
flexible as to what they include in the default budget.
Last year in Conway, for the first time, and voters voted for the default budget because it was less by like $1.5 million or something.
That was significant.
And the reason was because the bond expired for the high school. So that's very unusual. So are we any more on Madison, or can we move on?
I would just add, in general, to the SB2 issue that that it's true that people who are unable to or don't show up for the meeting lose some power of vote, and I think that's always been the argument. More people vote on voting day than show up at the meetings. But if the vote is irrelevant, who cares, right? What's really the difference? And so that would be the argument. And not virtually, every single moderator in New Hampshire that I know would prefer to have a traditional meeting versus an SB2 meeting. And one more thing about Conway. I think I went to the last, I wasn't a resident, but I went to the last school district meeting before Conway went to SB2 for the school. There were over 1,000 people present, and it was a big deal, and I think it had to do with the new school and things like that. So it was an important meeting. That was not the case all the time. But wow, what a great democratic experience. And other towns with that kind of turnout and more, 2,000, 3,000 people showing up, have multiple locations. They have video, they have microphones, they have assistant moderators. You can run a meeting with 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 people and have it be a traditional school meeting. And I think it would be great if even Conway considered that.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with SB2 was to give more people an opportunity to weigh in at the ballot box, which is true.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, it's a balance. I mean, it's not a balance, it's a trade-off. I mean, some people aren't going to show up. I mean, in the old days, I don't remember that school meeting, the Conway school meeting, because in the old days before SB2, typically it was the town meeting that got 1,000 people, and they would go 3 nights, and that's one of the reasons why we got to SB2.
Yeah.
But part of that was just tradition and culture, because people chat loosely like to get up and discuss a tractor or something, and that kind of thing. And the school was just never that interesting. I think today would be totally opposite.
School meetings are much faster. Simply because the warrant is so much shorter, and so you have a few warrant articles for capital purchases or whatever. But yeah, school meetings can be run very efficiently and are one-night events normally. Town meetings can be much more of an adventure. We've had 8-hour town meetings in Madison.
Yeah. Well, good. So that's a little segue to Conway's budget. And I know we talk about Conway's school system and all that, but you talked about you'd mentioned how the Madison census is down by 1/3 or whatever. Conway's high school graduating class next year will be about half what it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So how does anybody get in? One of the school board members said that we reported a couple weeks ago is that, the budget's going to go up for $1 million or $2 million every year because we have these built-in contracts. Right. So we got in trouble with the John Fuller School. It turns out they didn't read the contract, and we can't, do anything with it for a few years till the bond expires or whatever. I mean, is there any way, how does a regular person get a handle on a budget that big, and how can it not be trimmed a little bit, given the size of our school district now?
Sorry,
big question.
I'm gonna step back just a little bit on it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I read the quotes in the Conway Daily Sun from the Conway School Board as saying, we don't care whether Bartlett and Jackson and Madison and Tamworth and Eaton, whether you come here or not. We're not interested. It doesn't matter. You guys decide, and we'll tell you what you're going to pay and so on. It's a bizarre situation from the perspective of those of us in the outside districts, because we know what's going to happen to the budget because the cost per student is going to skyrocket as you simply don't have the volume to spread those costs out across not just the taxpayers of Conway, but the taxpayers of the sending districts. Half of the budget for the high school is paid for by the sending districts, and not much less than half of the budget for the middle school is paid for by the sending districts. And so the mindset of Conway, of the Conway School Board, I don't know what the mindset of the Conway people are, but the mindset of the Conway School Board, well, we don't care, we don't have to please you, it's not our problem, is guaranteed to result in an ongoing period of higher costs per Conway student, and therefore, without the revenue coming in, if the other towns start finding alternatives to educate their kids, without the revenue coming in to offset that, the tax rate is going to go up all the faster in Conway by losing the volume that they need in order to fund it. The same is true of competing with the charter schools. There's no effort made to compete with, Northeast Woodland School, right, or the Robert Frost School or whatever. Nobody seems to care. Nobody comments on it. Nobody is questioning why the number of students are leaving the Conway School District and going to those, because they don't seem to be able to do the arithmetic that you're getting killed financially if you can't attract a higher volume of students. Molten Borough is the perfect example where, and you have a different situation with tax rate being so low there, but you have a situation where they're desperate for kids. They know they need more students, and they're going to come up with some pretty attractive deals where the people of Tamworth, for example, will pay much less per student than the people of Molten Borough to send the kids to the Molten Borough School, because they want to buy kids to fill the place up. And Conway hasn't figured that out yet. So the negotiations are going on with the surrounding towns. The only right solution and the way to get costs under control in Conway and for all the towns around here is with a cooperative school district. It's the only way to do it, is to have the towns all locked in so that we're all in it together. All the capital expenditures are jointly addressed by all the shared towns, and you're not always dealing with the potential movement of towns and students in and out of your school.
Is that, when you have a cooperative versus what we have now in SEU, in a contract basically, does that assign costs any differently? Because what the other part of this lower census number of kids is when you're in Bartlett or Jackson, because Conway charges these sending towns based on the census, the number of kids, but also on their tax valuation.
Right.
So it may, I don't know the numbers exact, but if it costs Conway $20,000 a kid, it costs Bartlett $35,000 a kid. So
it costs Jackson $35,000. I'm not sure the difference is that significant in Bartlett, because the tax rate and the amount of property in Bartlett per kid isn't all that different from Conway's, whereas Jackson has all this property value and doesn't have any kids.
But Bartlett, believe it or not, it's not a debate, but believe it or not, before our reval, which increased everything by, Bartlett had the same value as Conway. Bartlett's got a ton of property up there,
and it's a separate issue, but it's one that's definitely impacting our schools, and that is the mess that Conway made by doing the early revaluation before things had settled down from the COVID change, where COVID damaged the value of commercial properties and greatly increased the value of residential properties, therefore moving the tax burden onto people in their residences and taking it away from Walmart, which is who you want to have pay all those taxes.
I mean, how do you, the other part about that, you're a trustee of UNH and you hired, presidents and chancellors and all that, and I realize there's a shortage of skilled people everywhere, so I get that. But now we have a superintendent, Amy, who's doing a great job, and now instead of just having an assistant, we're going to have an assistant and a curriculum coordinator. So that curriculum coordinator, who's a fine, educated woman, there's nothing against her, but she was the math coach, and now she's a curriculum coordinator. So her salary is $120 grand. And it's and in this valley, I'm not sure that there are a lot of salaries at $120 grand unless you're a doctor, when you have life and death situations, or owning your own business and those kind of things. But I don't get it. the salary difference and how we can afford to pay that when it seems so out of line to other professionals in the Valley? Or is it? Maybe that's the question to you.
So a couple points to be made. One is that you have a new superintendent whose background is not on the business side. You had key turnover of great long-serving people, very knowledgeable people
Jim
in
Hill,
the superintendent's office, and Becky, and just very talented people who knew everything. And so you had these mistakes. You had the mistake associated with the John Fuller School and the bond, which is actually a fairly subtle thing to catch, that in order to get people to buy the bonds, you had to guarantee they wouldn't be liquidated early. The people wanted to get the interest rates for a longer period of time. So there's subtlety to some of that stuff. There was the problem of getting the rates for tuition to the sending towns so they could get it into their budgets on a timely basis, and the SAU 9 struggled in order to perform that function. So the priority for a new superintendent who doesn't have a business background is to fill those slots and to make sure you get people in there who really know their stuff, and to get a chief financial officer, a contract management person for a $30–40 million a year operation. Yeah, that's a six-figure job. I don't know where you would go to find somebody who'd take that job for 99 grand. So that's step one. The other side of that, the curriculum coordination and so on, and I think we've had this conversation before. Boy, I'm awfully old-fashioned about this. I would love to see content area leadership. It used to be with in the high school, the department heads. But I would love to see content leaders in reading, in math, in science, in literature, and in the main subject areas who were classroom teachers who had a reduction in their workloads and got a kicker in their paychecks to be active throughout the district, however that's defined, whether it would be just Conway, or it would be a whole SAU, or it would be all the towns. I would love to see those folks serving.
Who were they? Who were the good ones back in the day?
Well, you had Gordon Mann, you had Carl Seidenstucker in the field of
even
social
people
studies.
Like Gary Millen, though, right?
Gary, I'm not sure. I think Don Trimble was the department head at that point, but I'm not sure Gary wasn't towards the end. You had mythical people. These were the finest educators this valley has had over the past 50 years, and they took responsibility for their subject area and making sure the teachers in all the schools, elementary school, middle school, high school, were all really prepared to teach those subjects and to have a coordinated curriculum. And it worked really well. And I get that somebody working full-time at curriculum management, that there can be some advantages to that, but no one person is going to be a wizard in each of the subject areas and a true expert. Those people who are full-time doing curriculum coordination are no longer in the classroom, or at least not that much. I would love to see classroom teachers with real subject area expertise as the content curriculum leaders. Who am I to tell our current superintendent, an out-of-date elderly gentleman like myself, and gentleman in question mark? But that's what I'd like.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think Penny Kittle was very good when she ran the English department. So it's that. It's interesting. We haven't reported this yet, but I guess they're going to somehow hold the curriculum coordinator to a standard and to some sort of measure. Now, I don't know what happens. That means the scores have to go up within a year or two or something. We haven't got that far yet, but then what do? You say, by the way, I mean, I could fire not that I've done it, but you've done it. You've had your own, with your business, if a salesperson doesn't perform, maybe it's find another job.
Yeah, but we know how hard it is to fire top administrators in a school district.
Yeah,
there's just a lot of political considerations, personal relationships and stuff that make it more difficult than when you have a relatively authoritarian business that has to deal with that kind of thing. Let me give you a specific example, though. Gordon Mann, right before I got out of college and came up here to teach, Gordon Mann looked at the kids coming into the high school, the freshmen coming into the high school, and he said, gee, too many of these kids can't add and subtract and multiply and divide. And so he created a test, created a 70-question test. As far as I know, and I think I'm right, he did it all by himself. And I remember that it was 70 questions. And basically applied that to every kid in 8th grade before they finished. And if they weren't able to hit 56 out of 70 of these questions, add, subtract, multiply, divide, whole numbers, fractions, and there are measurements involved. If they couldn't do that, then they were automatically assigned into a Math 1 class at the high school, and you stayed in Math 1 through 4 years of high school if you couldn't hit the 56. If you hit the 56 by Christmas time, you were done. You finished the class, you got your A probably, and you could move on to a more challenging math class. You could take algebra, geometry, or whatever. And he took responsibility for then taking that test and bringing it back not just to the 8th graders, but to the 6th graders before they moved into the middle school. He took it to Bartlett, he took it to Tamworth to make sure their kids were achieving those things. And it changed the way math was being taught throughout every school in all of the towns of the Mount Washington Valley, and it raised not all the math brilliance of the entire community, but it set a minimum standard that everybody was going to make and everybody was going to hit, and they did. And it was accomplished very, very quickly in a very short period of time, and he owned that. And he got 1 period a day off. Instead of teaching 5 classes a day, he taught 4 as the department head. And I don't know, but I'm going to guess he got $1,000 to be the
well, I
department
hope
head.
that and the other person, because I was on the superintendent search committee and all that, and and Jack Loyne, he was principal, but he was that math guy. He was that guy.
He was.
And I hope that the curriculum coordinator was coordinating with Jack Loyne. I think he's still doing part-time stuff because he was that ilk of that day.
And there's no chance for a curriculum coordinator to come in and say, boy, I know U.S. history, I know calculus, I know Shakespeare, I am an expert in all these things, and I am the person to devise the curriculum and all these things. They need help. And I know they recognize that. I don't mean they come in and make stuff up. But we've got a lot of talent in our school district. This is a way to find it and to retain those people by giving them a financial kicker and giving them more authority. I think that would be great.
I mean, we'll have to see how it works. I mean, I guess the one positive thing I would say, outside of shout outs to all the people we mentioned, is that at least the school board is focusing on curriculum. So having a curriculum coordinator is step one. Whether it works, you got to try something. So let's hope it works.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, believe it or not, we only have 2 minutes left, George.
Wow.
I know. I have to come back maybe.
This has been 2 hours long. We've been here for 2 hours.
Yes. So I just had a couple other subjects, but just generally in the state. So a budget, we got Republicans everywhere. They're coming into, really the legislature's had it easy for the last couple of years. Budgets have sailed through because there's so much COVID money. The Dems like it, the Republicans like it. Now the Republicans control, but they're inheriting a budget that they got to start making some cuts.
Absolutely.
And incoming governor, and I guess she's governor now, Ayotte says she came up with the equivalent of what Trump did. They call it COGE, COGE, I guess it's pronounced. And Craig Benson is part of that.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the whole cost-cutting thing? And Craig Benson, we haven't heard about him since he got in trouble for was he the guy that got in trouble for demolishing his beach or something?
He didn't get in trouble. That was the magic of this particular situation. He just paid the fine and he was able to demolish his beach. I participated in Craig Benson's transition process. I went down.
And he was our governor, for people who don't know.
For just 2 years, though. Yeah. He was unpopular with Democrats. He was Republican. He was unpopular with Democrats. He was really unpopular with Republicans because he was an abrasive character. And kind of Musk-like, he would come in, and he is a know-it-all, and in part because he knows a lot. And
he was a successful high-tech guy.
Very successful, yeah. 400 million bucks, something. Not 400 billion, but 400 million. and he bought himself the governorship for 2 years. The situation in the state is so very different from the federal government. The problem in the state isn't a lot of waste. New Hampshire is an incredibly efficient operation. You can always find some stuff, but it'd be nickel and dime stuff. There's no massive change that's going to occur to the state budget by creating efficiencies and by cutting lots of staff and so on. We already underpay our staff. You can't, they can't find computer programmers and people who want to get paid decently. They just can't hire these people. It's a tough situation in state government. We are last in the country in funding higher education. UNH and the other colleges are absolutely on the bottom in terms of state funding. They're called state colleges, but only roughly 8% of the funding of those colleges comes from the state. And really what that does is provide what is essentially scholarship money to buy down the tuition, almost like scholarship money for in-state students. It doesn't actually pay for much of anything. And the state prison system is still a mess and still underfunded. We know that the state is facing hundreds of millions of dollars from the Sununu Youth Center and the horrible abuses that occurred there. We know that the state, that the Republicans have removed the interest and dividends tax, that a very small number of people who were paid a significant amount. A lot of people pay little tiny bits, but a very small number of people paid any significant amount.
And that was $160 million.
$160 million just gone from the budget.
So what do you think? We only have a minute to go.
They're screwed.
All right, well, nice to talk to you, George, and we'll pick it up next time.
I don't know why anyone would want to be governor in this situation. Sununu and his daddy convinced him to get out while the getting was good, and he got out ahead of the crash that's going to occur and all the cuts that are going to be needed. It'll be fascinating to see how they fund stuff like the education freedom accounts, which is going to grow to 100 million plus if Republicans get their way. Yeah. And the one thing I guarantee you is that the towns and cities will get completely ripped off.
Well, I think they're also just cutting back on special education funding too.
They've already announced that. They went from 93% of what they're supposed to pay, which was half of what they're really supposed to pay, to now 60% of what they were going to pay.
All right, we got to stop there, George. Come back soon. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Take care.
We'll be back.